But first, we are seeing our electricity system pulled apart in front of our eyes, with nothing solid to replace it. Today, the Queensland Premier doubled down on her promise yesterday for Queensland to stop using coal for electricity in just 13 years from now.
As we move towards this clean, green revolution, everybody can see the world is transitioning.
Actually, what everyone can see is the world suddenly desperately short of electricity, particularly desperately short of coal and gas. Now, even the Albanese government's energy minister today admitted that.
At the moment, we're in a global energy crisis. I mean, we've all seen what's happening in Europe.
Yet, also today, AGL said it would close Victoria's biggest coal-fired generator, the Loy Yang one, around 10 years earlier than planned, by 2035. That is 1/3 of Victoria's supply gone. It will also close its Bayswater generator in New South Wales, and even earlier. It wants to go net zero, and that's largely because its biggest shareholder is tech billionaire Mike Cannon-Brookes, who's a global warming zealot, with investments in green energy, by the way, which I suspect should now be worth a lot more. But it's also because it's got a new Labor government in there, with policies to deliberately drive more coal-fired power stations like Loy Yang to the wall and drive them out of business even faster. Hear it from the acting CEO of AGL himself.
What has changed is a lot has changed in the market, both the energy markets, both politically. So politically, change of federal government.
So thank Labor for what's happening. What we're seeing is extraordinarily dangerous to our economy and our way of life. Now, we've already had green policies from both sides of politics, by the way, that have helped shut down 1/3 of Australia's coal-fired power stations already. That's one of the reasons we're so short of electricity. And now every single one of the last 16 stations we have left, they've got a close-by date. Next year, the Liddell Power Station in New South Wales will shut. That's 2 years after that then. The Australia's biggest power station, Eraring, also in New South Wales, will shut as well. And that will be 38% of New South Wales electricity gone in just 3 years. 38% gone in 3 years from now. And other coal-fired stations, they're shutting faster than expected. Queensland's now. But what is going to replace them? Well, suddenly we're being told, imagine we'll invent something, we'll build something, it's not there yet. Some governments are saying hydrogen will work, even though it's still not being proved at scale. Queensland, its government says it will spend $62 billion, half of it coming from private investors, on finding new sources, including especially pumped hydro, even though that actually doesn't create one spark more of electricity. It's actually just a kind of giant battery. It gets wind and solar power when there's lots of it spare in the system to pump water uphill. So when there's not enough renewable energy, you can then let the water flow downhill again to create hydro power. Now, obviously, when you hear that, you're thinking, well, we're sure going to need a lot more wind and solar farms, a lot more than we're already needing. And the Energy and Security Board says you're right. We're going to need 8 times as many of those wind and solar farms as we have already. So next time you're driving, for every wind tower you see spoiling the countryside, imagine 8 more. Plus, of course, the wires to connect them all. We are talking about a massive, massive investment, and it's going to cost much, much more than governments have been saying. I mean, you only have to look at Malcolm Turnbull's pumped hydro scheme, Snowy 2.0. He said that would cost, just $2 billion. Last time we looked, 7 times that amount, and of course, delayed. I tell you, this transition is going to take many hundreds of billions of dollars, every cent of which you are ultimately going to have to pay for, in higher charges or whatever. Taxes. In fact, the Energy Security Board put out a report today saying this massive physical investment, massive physical investment. These required investments will add to cost pressures on Australians. Well, no kidding, Sherlock. So you're going to pay and pay. And that means that this election promise from the Prime Minister will never, ever come true.
Cheap, renewable power will mean household bills drop by an average of $275 by 2025.
That promise was a hoax from the start, which is why you don't hear the Prime Minister repeating it now that he's safely elected. And of course, it will be the poor who suffer most. For some, electricity is going to become a luxury if it's not already. All this is so hard to believe. This country has hundreds of years' supply of coal under our feet. That's coal for cheap and reliable electricity, 24/7, night and day, windy or still. But our politicians are instead driving all our coal-fired stations out of business. And for what? Fact is, we could cut our emissions to zero in this country and still wouldn't change the world's temperature by anything that anyone could ever notice. The former chief scientist admitted that. And we're doing all this when we actually don't have the other electricity sources we will need to power the country instead. It's a giant leap in the dark made with a whole 21st century economy riding on the result. It's insane. And we've been warned already what this leads to. Because you can see right now, today, what happens in countries that were just this stupid before us. Germany, Britain, for instance, others in Europe, they got rid of their coal-fired stations. They went green. Now, as you can see, an energy crisis around the world, worst in Europe. So note this day. Note well the politicians telling you, we got this. We can get rid of coal-fired power and we'll figure out something, it's going to work, it'll be beautiful. Well, note their names, because one day we will be demanding a reckoning for this madness.